we can get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Rahul Mainra. I'm a transplant nephrologist in Saskatoon and chair of the CST Education Committee. And welcome to session number 7 of the Red Hot webinar series. And the Red Hot webinar series stands for Research Education Development for Healthcare Professionals in Organ Transplantation. And this is a project that was initiated by the CST Education and Research Committees with collaborative help from the CDTRP and financial support from a planning and dissemination grant from the CIHR. We have a really amazing talk planned for you today. So today is session number 7. We have one more webinar, session number 8, coming up in June. And then we hope to see everybody at the annual scientific meeting in October in Vancouver on October 6th to the 10th. Our Red Hot webinar series will be hosting a 4-hour immersive workshop for all the fellows and trainees that have been part of this along the way. So we look forward to that session. It's going to be actually really lots of fun. We're planning some great activities and some great faculty members that will be there mentoring you and allowing you to improve and hone your skills in research education. So definitely please look at attending. We do have some travel grants as a result of our CIHR grant that we have. So please apply for those, and we hope to have a good turnout in Vancouver this year. Today's talk is the essential elements of scientific writing for successful grants and manuscripts, and it'll be presented by Dr. Marie-Josée Hébert. I'm very honored to have her here today. Dr. Hébert is a nephrologist, researcher, and past co-director of the CDTRP. She holds the Canada Research Chair in Kidney Transplantation and Regeneration and is professor at the University of Montreal. Dr. Hébert is recognized nationally and internationally for her work in translational medicine and transplant immunobiology, as well as for her incredible leadership in Canadian transplant research networks. And it's my huge pleasure and honor to have her here today with us. She's going to talk to us about grant writing from burden to beacon. She'll talk for probably around 35-40 minutes, and then we should have ample time afterwards for questions. Please feel free to put those questions into the chat, either during the talk or at the end of the talk, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. Thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Hébert, for being here today and for your contribution to this webinar series, and we all look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much. It really is a pleasure to be here. And hopefully I will convince you that writing, and I'll probably focus on grant writing because there is this urban legend that grant writing is really a burden, that is something that's unpleasant. And I'll try to convince you that it can actually be fun, and it can actually represent a roadmap for developing your research career if this is being done appropriately and in a way that will kind of structure your critical thinking, but help you move forward. So I don't have any let me see. So I don't have any conflicts with regards to this presentation. And with regards to learning objectives, I like to focus first on reviewing the best practices in grant writing, and some of that is largely, obviously some of that stems from publication, but also from personal experience. But also, I'd like for all of us to take time and reflect on the role of grant proposals, the role that they play in developing someone's research career. And you probably think, she's stating the obvious, obviously I need grant money to do, my research, but there's more to that. And I think that, grant proposals can really be something that will guide you along the way if they are being developed over time in a way that really is shaping the way you approach research, but the way you approach your career also. So a few take-home messages about, grant writing, but also the research career first, grant writing, and I cannot stress that enough. Start early. And if you think that starting early is 2 months before the deadline, this is not my definition of early, as you will see. So start early, seek critique, not from your friends, not from your mother and father, like seek critiques from people who will be critical, because you want to get this critique way in advance and take that into consideration before you actually send your grant proposal to the funding organization. And once you've gotten this critique, take that into consideration, refine, review your grant accordingly, and polish it till you submit it. Your research career, take-home messages, and I'll try to illustrate that you can actually use your grant proposal as some kind of roadmap that will get you where you should be. And again, getting a grant is not the main goal of a research career. The main goal is doing research, getting results, producing new knowledge, sharing knowledge, and hopefully making sure that this knowledge will have an impact within your field of research, within potentially also your clinical field. So, so for that, you need to, in some ways, have some kind of, timeline that will allow you to evaluate, are you progressing the way you meant it to be, and your grant proposal and your timeline that you're drawing may actually be something to help you see how you are navigating the challenges. I would also urge you to interact as much as possible with obviously fellow colleagues, mentors, collaborators, students, highly qualified personnel, because research is obviously a team sport, and it's not to be developed in isolation. And as for grant writing, your research career is something that you need to reflect on, you need to review, you need to talk about it with your mentoring team, and this is really what will help you move forward, and in a way that will be hopefully fun and compatible with a healthy family work balance. So, as I did mention, for grant writing, I would really urge anyone, and not only for like your first grant that you're writing, but anytime when you're writing a new grant, and even if you're a seasoned investigator, try thinking about it early, and early means at least 6 months prior to the deadline. And so you need to start thinking about your proposal, but you also need to do the boring stuff, what looks like the boring stuff, ahead of time, because you need to make sure that you're thinking critically and in ways that are aligned with the goals of the competition that you are going to apply to. And so read the requirements for the grant proposal. If you can get your hand on previous proposals that have been funded by this organization, that would be incredibly helpful. And also talk to your research office advisor. Those people know a lot about, what to do, what not to do, how to present your objectives and your research program in a way that will align with the major goal of this competition and the major requirements. So this might be something that people do too close to the competition deadline, talking to the research office advisor, and then it's not always that easy to kind of reshape your research proposal. So the sooner the better. So going with what many people think is the boring stuff, but it's still important to read. So if you haven't done that, I would remind you that it's important to be aware of the tri-agency framework on the responsible conduct of research, especially if you're submitting something to a grant proposal to CIHR, NSERC, or SHRC. It's your responsibility to know those guidelines and to abide to those guidelines. And that also includes the conflict of interest and confidentiality policy of the federal research funding organizations. And I'm more than happy to share those websites with you and those web address. Equity, diversity, and inclusion in the research system is still something that in Canada that we need to consider. And I would submit to you, and I can be very passionate about that it is important to do it for the quality of science and making sure that we do not overlook questions because of blind spots that we may have within our own personal experience. So I always give this example coming from a family where there is a high risk of cardiovascular diseases. We have learned a lot about cardiovascular diseases in the past 50 years, but a lot more about the clinical syndromes that men experience compared to women. And it has been documented that women have a highest level of morbidity just because their clinical presentation is not exactly what had been described in previous major clinical cohorts that were largely composed of men. And that's only one example. So it's so easy to kind of overlook a very basic question. I'll give you another very personal example in my own research. At some point we're in the lab studying ischemia reperfusion injury in the kidney. And we were using, female mice basically because they would not bite one another after surgery, and it was costing less. But then at some point we decided, because it was mandated by CIHR, to look at male versus female mice. And guess what? There is a difference. A difference that we actually see also for those of us who have clinical activities. So I think that thinking about it, making sure that it's part of our research program and that it informs our methodology is something that remains very important and relevant, whatever some other people may say in other jurisdictions. It is still something very important to the Canadian research system. I would also I will also suggest that it might be important to have a look at the guidance on the use of artificial intelligence in the development and review of research grant proposal. This was made public by the Tri-Council a year or so ago, so it can be found on the website. And it's not about obviously preventing you from using generative AI, but it's about making sure that we all understand what it implies when we are using generative AI capacities. And so I'm going to be reading a bit, some of what's in there, because I think it's important that we're all, obviously more or less changed since ChatGPT, but we need to understand the limits and the advantages of this new technology. And that has been recognized by the tri-agencies. So we all agree that AI may be a valuable tool to applicants in the preparation of applications. But it is to be used in ways where applicants remain responsible for ensuring that information within their grant application is true, accurate, and complete, and that all sources are appropriately acknowledged and referenced. So, so obviously asking ChatGPT to or DeepSeek to write your grant proposal is certainly not the best way to make sure that you are assuming fully this responsibility. But using artificial intelligence to maybe validate some of your searches, validate some of your tests, some of the notions that you want to put forward as something that is not forbidden. But it's also important to state how you use AI and if AI has been used while developing your application. So all these guidance are, you can find them in the web, but again, you need to remember that the named applicant remains accountable for the complete content of their application. So besides reading all those guidelines, at least 6 months prior to the deadline, I would suggest to you that it's time to do your literature search, your literature review, and then, thinking about, what you've read and how it aligns with, some of preliminary data that you already have generated to come up with a hypothesis and the rationale that supports this hypothesis. And I suggest that it's important to write it. Don't keep it just in your head, because things are always clearer when you have it in your head. But yet somehow when you write it down on the paper, you put it on the paper, then you start experiencing some challenges with, how can I make it so clear that the reviewer will find it easy to read, will find it logical, novel, and will be convinced that, I'm the best person to do this research program. So this is really something that you want to make sure that you have time to think about it and to make it flow in a way that it will be felt as easy to read, rational and impactful. So I suggest that 6 months prior to the deadline, you start writing what I call an extended abstract. So you have you have brush strokes about your literature review, you come up with a rationale, you have your hypothesis, you have the main goals, you outline your specific objectives, and you don't go into the details of a research strategy, but you have the kind of major items that you would put in your research strategy to prove or disprove your hypothesis. And you also want to remember that you don't want your specific objectives, you don't want them to be contingent one upon the other. So they should be informing one another, but not if objective 1 fails, then 2 and 3 shouldn't be dependent on the success of objective 1. And then once you've written that, then you feel great and you feel that you've done a good job, then you get it reviewed. And so you find people who would read your kind of your expected extended abstract, and so who should be those people who review your proposal? So some institutions have internal review panel, but they usually don't run 6 months in advance. Say they're usually up and running something like 6 to 8 weeks before the deadline. So this is not the kind of this is not the type of individuals you want to have a look at your first proposal. So you really want to ask respected scientists. They may not be coming all from your institution. You want them to be in your broad field of research, but you don't want people who are working necessarily specifically in your direct field of research, because you want someone who would be representative of the type of people who will be reading your grant proposal. And And the vast majority of times, those people are not directly in your field of research. They know about, like, broadly your field of research. So if you're working in transplantation, usually it's going to be people working in transplantation, but not necessarily if you're like a natural killer cell expert. Well, they're not necessarily going to be NK cells specialists. So you really want to have like people who would be representative of the kind of average reviewer. Ideally, you would want someone who's active or has been recently active on peer review committees. And ideally, this person is not your friend. It's someone who doesn't know you that well. A person who's busy but committed to helping you. And you pray for getting real criticism, because at 6 months before the deadline, this is really when you need the criticism, because you have time to improve your preliminary data and make sure that the preliminary data that you generate does support your hypothesis and demonstrate feasibility. Because this, you shouldn't think that you need to do the whole thing to make it funded, because then you will get the criticism that, job done, why do you need the money? So, but you need to have enough preliminary data to show that your hypothesis stands and that the research program that you are outlining is feasible. And you may not have not everything at hand. So it's also important for you to think about who should I be working with to demonstrate feasibility of the whole research endeavor. And so this means thinking about strategic collaborations ahead of time. And then you have time to rewrite and rewrite again each and every section till you feel like you've gotten it. And then you get it reviewed again and again, because you want to make sure that it is crystal clear. Most reviewers will be, so that's why on the previous slide, I said you want a busy person who will commit to helping you reviewing your grant proposal, because, this is what reviewers are, and they're busy. So they need to get the main message from your proposal the first time they read it. And so it is incredibly important to be very logical, very rational, give all the information that the reviewer needs to understand why the research that you're proposing to do is relevant, is timely, and why you are in the best position to be successful at moving it forward. And so if you do this from 6 months to 2 months in advance, then if, for those of you who have internal review panels who will, within your institutions, be reviewing the grants, then it's actually easier to polish again and again, because it is a competitive world. So you really want to make sure that you have time to finesse your proposal, and that when you get it out, you can actually get it out early, 24 hours before the institutional deadline. And then you can have fun while you see all others losing sleep on their grant proposal. So those would be my kind of major advice on, how to write the grant. But then you need to deal with the outcome. And we all dream of getting an approval and getting this grant funded. And if it is funded, well, I think it's important to celebrate with your team. And again, I may be stating the obvious, but I'm sure nobody is the only person who contributed to the proposal. So you should do that as a team. You should engage your team. But if it's an award, then you should celebrate it with your team. And it's a good time to make sure that you use that for team bonding, and also to, obviously generate the positive energy you need to move forward. But even if you celebrate, I would urge you to read the comments carefully. And review your action plan and your research plan accordingly, because again, reviewers are not your enemies. Reviewers are not idiots, and they usually give a meaningful advice that can actually enhance your research program. And again, I cannot emphasize that enough. So the main goal of research is not to get funded. You need the funds to do research, and that's the main goal, to, obviously, get the work done, get those results, and then analyze the results and produce new knowledge and share new knowledge. So this is not the finish line, it's actually the starting line. But you may also have to deal with another outcome. And I would submit to you that it happens to everyone to get a not funded, a proposal that's not funded. So it's not the end of the world. It is unpleasant. It does not mean that you're not fit for research. It does not mean that you're a bad scientist. The success rate at CIHR improved last time around, last competition, it was at 17%, 1-7. It doesn't mean that there are 83% of, non-qualified health scientists in Canada. It only means that it's highly competitive. So if it's not funded, not fun, but that's life, and you need to know how to cope with it. So if it's not funded, take a deep breath. You may want to wait a day or two, but you really need to read the comments carefully and review your action plan accordingly, and to start preparing how you can answer this criticism. And you will probably need either new preliminary data, or to revisit some of your objectives, or to seek further collaborations. But when you are writing your rebuttal, and that's important for grant writing, it's also important when you're writing a rebuttal for an article. Remember to be polite. It is never ever helpful to be aggressive towards the reviewer. It will never work, and it will never help. So, and also, I guess we need to come to terms with the fact that, and I did mention that, reviewers are not idiots. So if they did not understand part of your proposal, don't blame it on the reviewers. Try to think, how can I make it clearer, crystal clear, so that everyone, but really everyone, would understand what I'm trying to do, and they would also understand why I'm the best person, the best scientist to do that. I would also argue that if you're not funded, it's actually time to meet with your mentoring team to establish a plan, a timeline, so that you will be ready for the next time around, because there will be a next time around, and you will be able to resubmit a improved, enhanced proposal. So now, develop your research career while having fun at it. I guess the same thing about, so writing a proposal and writing a grant and getting funded is, part of the deal of developing a research career. But the big deal is doing the research, and to be able to do that on the long run, so for a number of decades, you need to be able to prioritize and get optimal conditions. And so I would submit to you that if you really want to develop your research career in a way that will be, positive for you as a person, you need to understand your life priorities. Because if you don't, and you place all your priorities at number one, then it won't work, and you don't know. So you need to know, whether doing research or clinical duties, teaching, spending time with your loved ones, where all of that where does that all fit in? And how can you make it work somehow? Because if you're not asking yourselves those questions, well, you may actually be spending a lot of time on things that may not be so important to you. It's also important when those priorities are clear to be able to say no and able to say yes. And so for that, um, so you need to say no when things don't fit with the priorities that you've listed. Uh, but you also need to say yes, not to please everyone around you, but when this is an opportunity and it does align with your priorities, then it's important to get engaged. So, and sometimes it's not that easy to say no or yes to various opportunities that present themselves. And I would urge you to beware of two clinical syndromes that I've seen over the past decades that may actually prevent you from saying yes or no and making sure that you prioritize. And I call that the love and the superhero syndromes. And the love syndromes, like we see those syndromes very commonly in junior investigators, but not only junior investigators. So it happens at every stage of someone's career. But the love syndrome is really like you want to be loved by everyone. So you want your patients, for those of you who are health professionals, to love you, your colleagues, your students, the highly qualified your personnel, your boss, the reviewers. You basically you need love, and the consequences of obviously having expecting each and everyone to love you and see in you the most fantastic person is that you may be saying yes to everything and everyone who asks you something to do something, and the outcome is usually that you don't have time to do anything with depth and to really engage yourself. You will be spreading yourself too thin on too many priorities, and that is not compatible with a successful and fun research career. But you may be suffering from another syndrome I call it the superhero syndrome. And so some people believe that they can do it all. They can be the best at everything, and they are the best at everything, and they can actually do everything at the same time. And they say yes to everything because they're so good, but they don't also have time for anything. The worst cases I've seen are the super love hero syndrome. It does happen that you have those two syndromes together. And it usually is a case where you can be your worst enemy. So beware. So what happens if you have one or the other or both? Well, get help. And how can you get help? And talk to your mentors. And so I really think that it's one of the obviously one of the take home messages that I would like to leave you with. It's important to have mentors, a mentoring committee, ideally not only one mentor, but people you trust, people whom you respect, and who can actually guide you through the many challenges that will happen through an academic career or a research career, because you may develop a research career not only in academia. But I think it's important to not feel isolated, making sure that you can actually get advice, and that you do that while reflecting about your priorities. And also remember to talk to your loved ones when you're trying to prioritize, because they're usually part of your priorities, and therefore they should be part of the conversation. To develop your research career, so you need to make sure that you know your priorities, have people helping you, having some kind of soundboards around. But you also need to make sure that you have protected time for research. And for that, you need to learn to negotiate. You need to make sure that when you're talking to, so if you're interviewing for hiring positions, if you are have been hired but then have to be renegotiating the conditions. Well, you need to know, how to negotiate, and this is something that you can learn, and it's okay to negotiate. But for to be able to negotiate any type of negotiation, you need to know your priorities. If not, you're going to get the outcomes I illustrated with either the love or superhero syndrome. All of us who go through the research career development, actually, we usually don't do research full time. Some of us have teaching activities. Some of us have clinical activities. So I think it's important to not fragment your various activities, and I very often see that in junior, so assistant professors who, so when they're teaching, they're not thinking about research. They do research, but then they don't want to do teaching. And it's not going to be working on the long run. So you need to make sure that if you're teaching, you have the right actually to talk about your research and to be passionate about your research, and teaching is an opportunity for you to attract potentially the best students in your lab. And again, it's a team sport, so you really want to get like the best team on the ground. And it's the same thing for clinical duties. If you're a scientist, well, at least in my career, like the most difficult cases and kidney transplantations that I have been faced with have been major inspirations for my research program. And so I guess that clinical activities should not be developed at a detriment from your research program. That can actually be inspiration. They could fuel research questions that can provide settings for you to develop your research program, and those are optimal conditions. So teaching and clinical duties shouldn't be seen as roadblocks, but actually as facilitators that you can leverage if you want to really develop a productive and impactful research career. And I didn't mention that a number of times. Research is a team sport, so you need to develop your team and team spirit. So within your own research team, I guess it's important that you value the respective contributions of all members of your group. You support a respectful environment, favor collaboration amongst team members, support critical thinking, but the most important thing is to have fun together. If not, I would submit to you that's not worth doing a research career if you don't feel it's fun. But it's also important to develop your network and to attend national and international meetings, develop collaboration, also attend workshops, smaller workshops. These can be very both informative and important to develop new collaborations, and to also test ideas, discuss, and find lenses that will help you maybe ask questions a bit more creatively for your research program. And when you want to have optimal conditions, make sure that you're not your own worst enemy, that you don't suffer from any of the clinical syndromes I described, but you maintain a good balance, within your professional, between your professional and personal life, and that you pursue goals that are important for you, not for your clinical chief or your department head, but really like that it's important for you to make sure that those priorities, and what you're going after, and that you allow yourself and your team to have fun off the beaten track, because doing research is not about proving and stating the obvious. It's about wandering off the beaten track, and making sure that along the way you develop new knowledge and that you share this new knowledge. In closing, I'd like to again reiterate, I'm convinced that there are no career more fulfilling than research. It's been for me an immense privilege to having been able to lead a research team for more than 25 years now. You get to bond with, an array of brilliant folks. You venture within uncharted territories. You discover new roles and possibilities. The highs are so high when things are working, but there are lows, and you need to know how to cope with it. But it's a risky business, but I'm convinced it's worth taking the risks. And especially if we all remember to navigate the risks as a team, accept negative outcomes. It happens to everyone, but also like celebrate the positive outcomes and hopefully savor every moment. So thanks a million. I'd like to thank my team, so my students, all people in the lab, Julie and Francis Mignot, research associates in the lab, without whom I really couldn't be here speaking to you. Many collaborators and the funding agencies that have been supporting my work over the past years. So thanks a million for your attention, and I'll stop sharing, and I'll be happy to hear your questions, comments, and hopefully we can discuss all together.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hébert. That was a fantastic presentation. We're open to questions, so if you want to put any in the chat, you can. If you want to raise your hand, we'll keep an eye out for that and unmute and turn on your videos if you have any questions. I'm just going to put a little plug in for some of your statements about making those collaborations and strategic connections and even mentorship. Another great reason to come to the CST in Vancouver, because making those connections, the CST is a great opportunity to do that.
You're absolutely right. And I think it's important because we're very fortunate in Canada for many reasons, but we're very fortunate because we have communities that are at a scale where it's not so difficult to get acquainted to one another, get to know the other people, and we're very collaborative in Canada, and that's an asset, and we should be bragging about that. It's a lot easier. Maybe Australia has dynamics that are not so different from ours. It's not like that everywhere around the world. And collaboration is a major asset, especially in launching a research career, like finding collaborators, people who can really help you address questions that you've got to go there, but you don't have like personally the experience and the expertise, but you need to make sure that you kind of link out with the best people, and it's easy. And I would agree with you that CST is a great way to find collaborators, make new friends.
Absolutely. And in addition to that is just being more involved in the CST. We have lots of committees, the education committee, the research committee, that are always looking for trainees to be part of that. So, so it's a great idea to be involved in that. I don't see any questions yet. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the preliminary data that you had mentioned as part of the grant. And if you can maybe talk a little bit about the importance of that and how important it really is, and whether or not it needs to be your own preliminary data, or could it be data that you've seen in the literature? As you're starting off and you're writing a grant, you may not have funding to get some of that preliminary data.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that there are many types of preliminary data, but they need to support your hypothesis and show feasibility. And so the literature search is like the first thing that you need to do, because obviously you don't want to present something that has been done before. But you also want to show that amongst what is known, there are still questions or elements that need clarification, And then you are poised to provide those clarifications with your research program. So the preliminary data doesn't need to be extensive, but it needs to be strategic. And so usually, at least I do that in my lab. So I don't know if, and others, I guess, should do that. But so if we have like postdocs in the lab, they usually are allowed to, kind of leave the lab with, some data that will actually be supportive of their own hypothesis and their own research programs. But this is something that you need to discuss with your supervisor. So you don't want to steal data out of your supervisor's laboratory. That doesn't work well. But you should sit down with your supervisor and say, so how do you feel if I were to write my grant proposal on this, and do you feel that it's overlapping with what you're doing, and how could you? So, and that's the kind of getting the optimal conditions and learn how to negotiate and bargaining. And so you do that with your supervisor. Some of you may have some, startup funds, and this is something that you probably want to negotiate also when you're looking for a position, if you will have some startup funds to get this preliminary data. But it's important to kind of think about your research program before you rush into the lab and get the data, because you want to make sure, usually you don't have like millions of dollars to start up your lab. So you want to be strategic, and you really want to put the emphasis on the major elements that will prove that it's feasible, it's timely, I'm the best person to do it. So, and you may want to discuss that with your mentoring team also. So, and mentors sometimes can actually provide some data from their own like research expertise or programs. So or collaborators, but you want to gather all the information you can have that supports your hypothesis and show feasibility.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions or comments? I was also curious about the AI and the large language models that are available now. And it's really interesting. I mean, I think it's totally, well, I think it's dangerous to ask your AI to generate a grant for you, or at least a research question. But I think we all use it to improve our grammar and to improve what a paragraph sounds like. How acceptable is that in the eye of the reviewers when you admit to using AI to improve your grammar and improve how your grant sort of reads, the readability of it?
Yeah, so that is totally acceptable. I would encourage you to, look at those guidelines. It's evolving rapidly, but that is being seen as, totally acceptable. But you shouldn't use it in ways where the AI would become accountable for what you are proposing. So if you're improving your grammar, you really thought out your strategic plan, your experimental methodology, and then you just really want to polish it. Well, it's like you're asking someone to see whether you do revise your grammar. So your intellectual contribution is still very much foundational to your research program. It's when you would be asking an AI to either do your literature review and then don't necessarily get the references. And when you do your literature review, you should be reading those articles, not only reading like the main title and, oh, okay, so that works with my hypothesis and I'm going to state this one and that one. You need to read it because you need to own it. And if you own it, that's, how it's going to be a roadmap in the long term. And as I stated, not only getting the money, but using your proposal to say, yeah, I thought I wanted to do this and that because it's logical, because step A follows step B. And then, yeah, that is why I needed to do this. So So it's your own logic, it's your own contribution, and that cannot be replaced by an AI because, obviously there are things that you wrote in your grant proposals that you will have to kind of redefine because it cannot be all right. But it's the kind of critical thinking that you put into that will help you kind of move forward along the way, and the AI cannot do that for you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I don't see any more questions. Dr. Hébert, thank you so much for that excellent talk and your mentorship and your experience and guidance, not only for our academic careers, but also for our personal lives. Thank you so much. It's an honor to always hear your presentation. So I really appreciate you being involved in this webinar series.